My name is Olivia Reed, and I watched my parents hand over my investment property to my younger brother at a family meeting they orchestrated. They smiled as they told me I was too successful to need it. What they didn't know was that I had quietly secured a hidden deed years earlier, a decision that would save me from financial ruin and teach them an unexpected lesson about respect. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Success has always been my closest companion. Where others see obstacles, I identify opportunities. Where colleagues retreat from pressure, I advance toward it with calculated precision. My name is Olivia Reed, and for the last 6 years, I've been a senior investment strategist at Morgan Financial Group, one of Boston's most prestigious wealth management firms. The corner office on the 32nd floor provides a panoramic view of Boston Harbor that most would find distracting. For me, it's a daily reminder of perspective, how individual decisions connect to create larger patterns, just like the boats navigating the harbor channels below. My clients trust me with their financial futures because I see patterns others miss and opportunities hiding in plain sight. Ms. Reed, your 3 o'clock is waiting in the conference room, my assistant, Jeremy announces through the intercom. Also, your mother called again. She said it's urgent regarding the family meeting this weekend. Thank you, Jeremy, I respond, glancing at the framed photograph on my desk. My parents standing proudly outside their modest suburban home, the one I helped them purchase 5 years ago when their retirement savings proved insufficient. Tell Mr. Donovan I'll be right there. I'll return my mother's call later. The rhythmic tapping of my heels against marble flooring punctuates my journey to the conference room. Colleagues nod respectfully as I pass. At 34, I'm the youngest senior strategist in the firm's 60-year history. The promotion came after I identified a market anomaly that generated an additional $12 million in profits for our top clients during last year's economic downturn. My professional success stands in stark contrast to my personal accommodations. My apartment in Cambridge is functional rather than luxurious, 1,200 square feet with minimal furnishings and practical amenities. It's a place to sleep between workdays, not a showcase for prosperity. My true investment has been in securing assets rather than displaying them. The client meeting concludes successfully with a 7-figure portfolio commitment. As twilight descends over Boston, I finally return my mother's call from the privacy of my office. Olivia, finally, she answers on the second ring. We've been trying to reach you all day. I was with clients, Mom. What's the urgency about Saturday's meeting? Your father and I have been making some important decisions about the family's future. We want everyone together to discuss them properly. Thomas and Rebecca will be there too. My siblings, always referred to collectively, the twins inseparable in my parents' narrative despite being 28 years old. 12 years my junior, they entered our family when I was already managing household budgets and helping with mortgage calculations. I'll be there, I assure her, mentally rearranging my weekend schedule. Is there anything specific I should prepare for? Just yourself, dear. And maybe wear something nice? Not one of those severe business suits. This is family. The subtle criticism doesn't escape me. My professional attire, severe in my mother's estimation, represents a boundary between the organized competence of my work life and the emotional complications of family dynamics. After hanging up, I open my personal accounting software and review the monthly transfers. $2,800 to parents' mortgage, $600 to parents' property tax, $450 to Thomas' education loan, $350 to Rebecca. Car payment. The combined $4,200 monthly total represents nearly 20% of my take-home pay. It's a significant sum, but my salary makes it manageable. The transfers have become so routine that I rarely question them. Financial support transformed into background noise in our family symphony. More noteworthy is the investment property on my balance sheet, a duplex in an emerging neighborhood that I purchased 4 years ago when the market bottomed out. The property had been my father's obsession initially, a sure thing he'd identified, but couldn't finance on his retired teacher's pension. I secured the mortgage, renovated both units, and now collect rental income that nearly covers the monthly payments. Technically, the property remains in my name, though my parents manage it, collecting rent, handling maintenance issues, and taking pride in what they call our family investment. I've never corrected their perception. Their involvement gives them purpose in retirement, and I've been content to let them maintain the illusion of co-ownership. What they don't know, what no one in my family knows, is that I took an additional precautionary measure 3 years ago after my brother's gambling problem came to light. A quiet consultation with my attorney resulted in a secondary deed structure, creating a legal fortress around the property that would activate under specific conditions of attempted transfer or encumbrance. Just insurance, my attorney had called it when I expressed discomfort about not informing my family. Families and finances can create complicated situations. This protects your investment without creating unnecessary tension. At the time, it seemed like excessive caution. My family had always emphasized collective support. My financial contributions merely an extension of the values my immigrant parents had instilled. Family above all, my father would say in his characteristic Romanian accent. We succeed together or fail together. That philosophy had guided my decisions since childhood. While my peers enjoyed typical teenage experiences, I worked part-time jobs to contribute to household expenses. When college acceptances arrived, I chose the institution offering the most substantial scholarship rather than my dream school. After securing my first professional position, my initial paychecks went toward clearing my parents' credit card debt rather than establishing my own financial independence. The pattern continued into adulthood. When the twins needed college tuition assistance because their academic scholarships covered only partial costs, I created monthly transfers without hesitation. When my father developed health problems requiring treatments not covered by insurance, I liquidated my nascent stock portfolio to cover medical expenses. These decisions weren't sacrifices in my mind, but investments in our collective prosperity. My financial support enabled my siblings to pursue opportunities I never had, allowed my parents peace of mind in retirement, and fulfilled my role as the responsible eldest daughter of immigrants who had sacrificed everything for their children's future. Perhaps that's why the growing unease about Saturday's family meeting feels like betrayal of my own values. Something in my mother's tone, a subtle evasiveness in her explanation, triggers the analytical instincts that serve me so well professionally. The pieces don't align properly. A family meeting requiring formal attire to discuss future plans carries implications beyond routine updates. As I prepare to leave the office, my phone signals an incoming text from Thomas. Heads up, big sis. Parents have been having lots of private talks with their attorney. Something major brewing for Saturday. Thought you should know. My brother's warning, unusual given our typically superficial communication, confirms my suspicion. Whatever announcement awaits at Saturday's gathering, it represents a significant shift in family dynamics, one that Thomas believes might affect me adversely enough to warrant advance notice. I send a brief acknowledgement, then linger at my office window watching darkness envelop the harbor. The navigation lights of boats create patterns against the darkened water, predictable movements following established channels. Unlike those, vessels with clear routes and protocols, I'm sailing into unfamiliar waters where family loyalty and financial prudence might finally collide. What I couldn't possibly anticipate was how Saturday's revelation would fundamentally transform not just my understanding of family, but my perception of myself. From supportive daughter to financial safeguard, from silent contributor to assertive protector of what was rightfully mine. The drive to my parents' suburban home in Lexington takes precisely 47 minutes from my Cambridge apartment on Saturday morning, a journey I've made countless times yet increasingly less frequently as professional responsibilities have. expanded. I use this transitional time to shift mental frameworks from investment strategist to dutiful daughter, a transformation requiring more conscious effort with each passing year. Autumn leaves carpet the winding streets of my parents' neighborhood, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the muted grays of downtown Boston. The property values in this area have appreciated significantly since my parents purchased their colonial-style home 7 years ago. A purchase I facilitated with a substantial down payment from my year-end bonus after their retirement accounts proved insufficient for their desired lifestyle. I park my modest sedan behind Rebecca's luxury SUV, financed through my gift last Christmas, and Thomas's new sports car, ostensibly purchased through his commissioned sales position, though I suspect parental subsidization. The comparison is not lost on me. My practical vehicle against their flashier choices reflects our divergent approaches to financial security. As I approach the front door, I mentally calculate my total financial contributions to this household over the past 6 years: $600 in mortgage payments, $43,200 in property taxes, approximately $62,000 in various home improvements, and countless smaller expenses described as emergencies or opportunities. The investment property represents another substantial commitment: $87,000 for the down payment and renovation costs, plus the ongoing mortgage differential not covered by rental income. The door opens before I can knock, revealing my mother in an elegant dress that I recognize from the collection I purchased for her 60th birthday last year. "Olivia, right on time as always," she exclaims, embracing me briefly. She steps back, assessing my appearance with a critical eye. "I see you wore a suit anyway." "It's not a suit, Mom. It's a blazer and trousers," I correct gently, though we both recognize the distinction is meaningless to her. Professional attire represents my prioritization of career over family in her estimation, regardless of how that career financially supports the family. The house interior reflects my mother's impeccable taste: tasteful furnishings, carefully curated artwork, and the subtle scent of cinnamon from perpetually burning candles. The renovation I financed 2 years ago transformed the dated interior into a showcase worthy of architectural magazines. Family photographs line the entryway, though I notice the ratio heavily favors images of the twins, their graduations, vacations, and casual gatherings dominating the visual narrative of our family. In the living room, my father rises from his leather recliner, another gift from me, with a warm smile that partially dissolves my lingering apprehension. "There's my investment genius," he announces, his accent more pronounced when emotional. His embrace feels genuinely affectionate rather than performative. Despite our complicated dynamics, the bond with my father remains my strongest family connection. His immigrant work ethic and emphasis on education provided the foundation for my success. The twins occupy opposite ends of the sectional sofa, both engrossed in their phones. Rebecca's platinum blonde hair, professionally maintained at considerable monthly expense, contrasts sharply with her dark roots, a metaphorical representation of the superficial success built upon financial assistance she prefers not to acknowledge. Thomas glances up briefly, offering a subtle nod that reinforces his earlier warning text. "Olivia finally graces us with her presence," Rebecca comments without looking up. "How's life among the financial elite?" "Busy but fulfilling," I respond, neutrally, choosing a wingback chair positioned to observe everyone simultaneously. "How's the interior design business?" "Evolving," she answers vaguely. "The startup phase takes longer than expected, but I'm building important industry relationships." Translation: her third attempt at entrepreneurship remains unprofitable after 18 months, despite the substantial business loan I provided for initial inventory and marketing. The pattern has become predictable: enthusiastic venture announcements, requests for capital investment, months of minimal effort, followed by business model pivots that never materialize into sustainable income. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Thomas, at least, maintains consistent employment as a pharmaceutical sales representative, though his gambling addiction periodically creates financial crises requiring intervention. The most recent episode 4 months ago resulted in another family loan of $12,000 to prevent collection actions. Money transferred from my account with the understanding it would be repaid in installments that have yet to materialize. Lunch is ready, my mother announces from the dining room doorway. Thomas, help your father with the wine. The formal dining table, an antique cherry wood piece I sourced from an estate sale, is elaborately set with the Wedgwood china typically reserved for significant holidays. Crystal glasses catch light from the chandelier I had installed during the renovation, creating prismatic patterns across the white tablecloth. This seems ceremonial, I observe, taking my assigned seat. What's the occasion beyond family discussion? Can't a mother prepare a nice meal without interrogation? My mother responds with forced lightness. I've made all your favorites. Indeed, the table features an impressive spread of traditional Romanian dishes: sarmal, cabbage rolls, mamaliga, polenta, and the mitate, grilled meat rolls, that represent my childhood comfort food. The effort is undeniable, as is the calculated emotional appeal of cultural cuisine reserved for celebrating significant milestones. Throughout lunch, conversation remains superficial and carefully orchestrated. My father discusses community activities that occupy his retirement. My mother details her garden club competitions. The twins share anecdotes about mutual friends and social events from which I'm perpetually absent due to work commitments. No one inquires about my recent professional achievements: the promotion to the firm's executive committee, the industry award for innovative investment strategy, or the journal article analyzing emerging market trends. My financial contributions to the family receive equal disregard in the conversation, though they enable the very lifestyle being discussed. The dynamic isn't new, but feels particularly pronounced today. I've long recognized my paradoxical position within the family structure, indispensable for financial support, yet peripheral to emotional inclusion. My role resembles that of a silent investor expected to provide capital without expectation of recognition, appreciation, or consultation regarding fund allocation. As my mother serves dessert, placinta cu miere, apple strudel, prepared from my grandmother's recipe, my father clears his throat with ceremonial significance. The twins exchange knowing glances before focusing intently on their dessert plates. Olivia, my father begins in the formal tone reserved for significant pronouncements. Your mother and I have been contemplating our legacy and what we'll leave for our children. We're not getting any younger, my mother adds, taking her seat beside him. It's important to have clarity about these matters before they become necessary conversations. I nod cautiously, maintaining a neutral expression despite the accelerating heartbeat beneath my composed exterior. That's always prudent. We've finalized our estate planning, my father continues. After considerable reflection, we've decided that the investment property will be transferred entirely to Thomas upon our passing. The property, my property. The duplex purchased with my down payment, my mortgage qualification, my credit history. The investment I researched, secured, renovated, and legally own, despite allowing my parents to manage its operations. I wait for additional explanation, perhaps acknowledgement of my ownership, clarification about legal impossibility, or recognition of my financial stake. Instead, expectant silence fills the room as 3 pairs of eyes observe my reaction. I'm confused, I finally respond, my voice measured despite internal turmoil. The investment property is legally in my name. I own it. I purchased it. I hold the mortgage. That's just paperwork, Olivia, my mother dismisses with a wave. It's always been understood as a family investment. Your father found it. We manage. It and the income benefits everyone. But I pay the mortgage differential when rental income falls short, I counter, struggling to maintain professional composure. I funded the renovations. I qualify for the tax implications. Which you can clearly afford, Rebecca interjects. Unlike Thomas, who could actually use the security of rental income for his future. My brother at least has the decency to look uncomfortable, staring at his dessert rather than meeting my gaze. We've already consulted with our attorney, my father states with finality. The paperwork is prepared for your signature to transfer the property into a trust that will eventually pass to Thomas. We'll continue managing it during our lifetime, of course. The confidence in his statement reveals profound misunderstanding, or willful ignorance, of property law, ownership rights, and the limits of their authority. The secondary deed structure I established would prevent such transfer without my explicit consent, a protection I never anticipated needing to invoke against my own family. And what about the equity I've built? I asked quietly. The down payment? The renovation investments? The mortgage payments? Family doesn't keep ledgers, Olivia, my mother responds, her tone hardening. You've always been obsessed with calculating contributions. That's why we're making this decision. Thomas and Rebecca need security for their futures. You've already established yourself. The irony is breathtaking. My financial success, achieved through disciplined saving despite substantial family support, now justifies diverting my own asset to siblings who've demonstrated neither financial responsibility nor reciprocal support. In this moment, looking at the four faces around the table, my parents' righteous certainty, Rebecca's smug satisfaction, Thomas's conflicted avoidance, I recognize a fundamental truth I've been denying for years. The family dynamic I've financially sustained doesn't actually exist. My role has never been cherished daughter or respected provider, but convenient resource to be allocated according to others' desires. For the first time, I see our relationship with absolute clarity, not through the distorting lens of filial, obligation, or cultural expectation, but as the fundamentally imbalanced arrangement it has become. My financial contributions aren't appreciated investments in collective prosperity, but expected tributes from which others benefit while I remain on the periphery of true belonging. This revelation doesn't diminish my love for my family, but transforms my understanding of my responsibility to them, and more importantly, to myself. Before we proceed with any paperwork, I state carefully, setting my dessert fork aside, I think we should discuss this further in private, perhaps with both our attorneys present. My suggestion introduces a measured pause to what my parents clearly anticipated would be a simple matter of compliance. The dining room's elegant chandelier casts strategic shadows across the antique table, highlighting the subtle shift in expressions around me. My father's confident smile falters slightly, revealing confusion rather than concern. My mother's perfectly manicured fingers tense around her water glass, the first indication that my response wasn't part of her choreographed scenario. The twins exchange glances, Rebecca's triumphant smirk transforming into irritation while Thomas's discomfort deepens into something resembling guilt. Attorneys? My mother repeats with a forced laugh. Olivia, this is a family matter, not a corporate negotiation. The decision has been made with everyone's best interests in mind. Everyone except mine, apparently, I respond, maintaining professional composure despite the emotional undercurrent threatening to surface. Years of navigating high-stakes financial negotiations have equipped me with the ability to compartmentalize personal reactions when necessary. Since we're discussing a significant asset that I legally own, I believe proper consultation is appropriate. My father leans forward, his expression softening into the persuasive demeanor he employed throughout my childhood, when redirecting my ambitions toward family priorities. Olivia, perhaps we've approached this incorrectly. We should have discussed this with you first, privately. Would you join me in my study after dessert? We can review the details more thoroughly. This invitation, positioned as conciliatory while actually separating me from potential allies, represents a familiar negotiation tactic. Isolation increases vulnerability, a principle applicable in both corporate acquisitions and family manipulations. The study has always been my father's domain, the physical space where his parental authority feels most concentrated. Actually, I counter smoothly. Since this involves a property matter that affects multiple parties, I think everyone should participate in the discussion. Transparency benefits us all. Rebecca rolls her eyes dramatically. Always the executive, turning everything into a board meeting. Some things never change. Speaking of change, I redirect, turning toward my brother. Thomas, you've been uncharacteristically quiet. How do you feel about becoming the designated beneficiary of a property you've never financially contributed to? Thomas shifts uncomfortably, avoiding direct eye contact. It wasn't my idea, Liv. Dad approached me about it a few weeks ago, said it would provide stability considering my situation. The vague reference to his gambling addiction hangs in the air, unacknowledged yet present. Your situation, I repeat neutrally. The same situation that required my financial intervention 4 months ago? That does raise interesting questions about asset management capabilities. That's unnecessary, Olivia, my mother interjects. Sharply. Thomas has been making significant progress with his challenges. The property would provide structure and responsibility. The twisted logic is almost admirable, transferring a valuable asset to someone with documented financial mismanagement issues as a developmental exercise at my expense. In any investment scenario, this would be classified as high risk with minimal potential return. Perhaps we should take this conversation to the living room, my father suggests, clearly attempting to diffuse the growing tension. More comfortable for a family discussion. We relocate to the living room, a space I redesigned and furnished 3 years ago during the comprehensive home renovation I financed. The strategically positioned seating arrangement, a semicircular sectional facing 2 accent chairs, creates an unintentional deposition atmosphere. My parents and siblings occupy the sectional, presenting a united front, while I select one of the accent chairs, maintaining professional posture despite the increasingly adversarial environment. Let me ensure I understand correctly, I begin, utilizing the clarification technique that serves me well in client misunderstanding scenarios. You've consulted an attorney about transferring a property that I legally own, with a mortgage in my name to Thomas without first discussing this with me. The actual owner? You're being needlessly technical, my mother responds dismissively. The property has always been a family investment. A family investment that I solely financed, I correct gently. The mortgage payments, property taxes, and insurance are all in my name and paid from my accounts, which we manage for you, my father counters. We collect the rent, handle tenant issues, and coordinate maintenance. That's a significant contribution. Property management typically commands a 10% fee of collected rent, I note. Not 100% ownership transfer to an unrelated third party. Unrelated third party? Rebecca interjects incredulously. He's your brother. In legal terms regarding property ownership, that's precisely what he is, I explain with the patience I reserve for inexperienced investors. Blood relation doesn't create property rights. My father leans forward, adopting his professor's tone from his teaching days. Olivia, you're approaching this from a purely legal perspective, but family transcends legal structures. We raised you to understand that family resources should be distributed according to need. You're financially secure while Thomas and Rebecca face more uncertain futures. The statement crystallizes the fundamental disconnect in our perspectives. My financial security didn't materialize through cosmic accident, but through deliberate choices, disciplined saving, and strategic career investments, all while simultaneously supporting the family. Meanwhile, my siblings' uncertain futures directly correlate to their inconsistent work histories, abandoned educational opportunities, and persistent financial irresponsibility. I'm curious about the timing, I redirect, maintaining a conversational tone despite the increasingly confrontational atmosphere. Why make this decision now, rather than maintaining it as a provision in your will? My parents exchange a glance that confirms my suspicion. There's an unstated urgency driving this sudden redistribution attempt. My mother adjusts a decorative pillow, a nervous habit she displays when concealing information. We believe in handling these matters while we're still able to oversee the transition, she offers vaguely. Planning ahead is simply responsible. Thomas shifts uncomfortably, drawing my attention. His discomfort appears deeper than mere awkwardness about receiving an unearned asset. Something specific is triggering his unease. Thomas, I address him directly, is there something about this situation I should know? My brother's expression flickers between guilt and resignation before he responds. I might as well tell her, he says, directing this to my parents rather than me. She'll find out eventually. Thomas, this isn't the appropriate time, my father interjects sharply. When would be appropriate? After she signs over her property? Thomas counters with unexpected backbone. He turns to me, meeting my eyes directly for the first time. I'm getting married in 3 months. Shannon and I are expecting a baby. Dad and Mom think we need a stable home, especially with my history. They want us to live in one unit of the duplex and keep renting the other for income. The revelation lands like a calculated afterthought rather than the central consideration it clearly represents, not simply a future inheritance, but an immediate housing solution for a grandchild, a significant detail deliberately omitted from the initial proposal. Congratulations on both the engagement and the baby, I offer sincerely, separating my personal feelings about his life development from my concerns about the property manipulation. That's significant news that certainly contextualizes this discussion differently. We wanted to solve everything at once, my mother explains, her tone softening as if the pregnancy justifies the attempted appropriation. A simple property transfer would secure Thomas and Shannon's future and give them stability during this important transition. At my expense, I clarify, not as accusation, but as factual assessment. You wouldn't even notice the difference. Financially, Rebecca interjects with characteristic dismissiveness, you probably have multiple properties we don't even know about. Her assumption, that I maintain secret assets while simultaneously funding family needs, reflects a fundamental misunderstanding of how financial responsibility operates. My investment strategy prioritizes long-term security over immediate acquisition, with significant portions of my income directed toward both retirement planning and family support. Actually, I don't, I correct calmly. The duplex represents my primary investment property, strategically selected for its appreciation potential in an emerging neighborhood. My investment portfolio otherwise consists of diversified financial instruments rather than additional real estate. See? Financial jargon to obscure the simple fact that you have money and Thomas needs it more. My mother concludes triumphantly, as if my explanation confirmed her perspective rather than contradicted it. What I have, I clarify with deliberate precision, is financial stability achieved through careful planning, strategic career choices, and consistent discipline, while simultaneously supporting this household for the past 6 years. The statement creates momentary silence as its implications register. My father's expression shifts toward thoughtful consideration, while my mother's hardens into defensive indignation. Rebecca appears merely irritated at the interruption to their predetermined outcome, while Thomas's discomfort visibly intensifies. Nobody asked you to support us, my mother finally responds, her tone defensive. Everything you've contributed has been your choice. Choices made based on the understanding that we were building collective family security, I counter, not establishing a one-way transfer of resources. And now we're making decisions about family security that recognize Thomas's immediate needs, my father states with renewed authority. The paperwork is already prepared. We just need your signature to complete the transfer. The confidence in his statement confirms my earlier assessment. They genuinely believe I'll comply with their directive despite its fundamentally inequitable nature. This conviction isn't merely presumptuous, but revealing of our established dynamic. My professional expertise valued for its financial benefits, but dismissed when applied to family matters. I'd like to review this paperwork, I request, shifting from defensive explanation to proactive engagement. Since it concerns my legal asset, I should understand exactly what's being proposed. My father hesitates briefly before retrieving a folder from his desk in the adjacent study. The manila envelope bears the letterhead of Peterson and Williams, a local law firm specializing in estate planning that I recognize from my professional network. It's straightforward, he explains, extracting several documents. A simple title: Transfer into a family trust with Thomas as the designated beneficiary. We would remain property managers during our lifetime. I accept the documents and begin reviewing them with the methodical attention I apply to any financial instrument. The legal language confirms my concerns. A comprehensive transfer relinquishing all ownership rights, effective immediately upon signature, with no financial compensation specified. The document's professional preparation lends an air of legitimacy to what is essentially an inequitable appropriation. This isn't a planning document, I observe, maintaining professional composure. This is an immediate transfer of a significant asset with no compensation structure. Essentially, you're asking me to give Thomas a property worth approximately $680,000 that I'm still paying the mortgage on. Family helps family, my mother responds with the familiar refrain that has justified countless one-sided financial transactions. You wouldn't be paying the mortgage much longer anyway. This curious statement captures my full attention. Why wouldn't I be paying the mortgage much longer? Another loaded glance passes between my parents before my father responds with obvious reluctance. The document includes a clause transferring mortgage responsibility to the trust, which we would manage. With what assets? I inquire, knowing their combined retirement income barely covers their personal expenses without my supplemental support. The uncomfortable silence that follows contains my answer. The unspoken plan becomes transparent. Transfer the property to Thomas while expecting me to continue making mortgage payments, maintaining my financial obligation while relinquishing ownership rights. The arrangement's inherent inequity is so profound, it momentarily leaves me speechless. In this moment of clarity, I recognize that Saturday's family meeting was never intended as a discussion, but as a performance. A ceremonial transfer of my asset disguised as collective decision-making. My role was scripted as cooperative donor, rather than respected owner or equal participant. This realization doesn't diminish my love for my family, but fundamentally transforms how I understand my responsibility to them, and more importantly, to myself. The path forward requires neither emotional confrontation nor immediate disclosure of the secondary deed structure, but rather strategic reassessment of boundaries that have clearly eroded beyond sustainable limits. I'll need time to review these documents thoroughly, I state, returning the papers to the folder. Financial decisions of this magnitude require proper consideration, especially when they impact multiple parties. What's there to consider? Rebecca challenges. It's a simple yes or no. Are you helping Thomas or not? Her reductive framing attempts to transform legitimate financial concerns into a referendum on familial love, another familiar tactic in our household's emotional negotiation playbook. I'm considering how to best support Thomas's transition to parenthood while maintaining appropriate financial boundaries, I respond carefully. Property transfer may not be the optimal solution for everyone involved. My measured response clearly fails to satisfy any family member's expectations. Disappointment, confusion, and frustration register across 4 faces with varying intensity. In this moment, I recognize that my decision has already been made, though its implementation requires strategic planning rather than emotional declaration. The structured meeting my parents orchestrated to facilitate my compliance has instead catalyzed my recognition of necessary change. The hidden deed my attorney recommended as insurance will indeed serve its purpose, not merely protecting a physical asset, but preserving my agency in a family system that has gradually, almost imperceptibly, prioritized resource extraction over mutual respect. The tension in the living room thickens as my noncommittal response hangs in the air. My mother's practiced smile falters, revealing fleeting disappointment before reassembling into determined pleasantness. My father's professorial demeanor shifts toward paternal authority, a mode he reserves for situations where logical persuasion proves insufficient. "Olivia," he begins, leaning forward with hands clasped, "perhaps we haven't adequately explained the urgency of this situation. Thomas and Shannon's lease ends next month. With the baby coming, they need stable housing immediately. We've already promised them they could move in by the 1st of the month," my mother adds. The casual revelation of this predetermined arrangement landing like a calculated afterthought. The statement clarifies the orchestrated nature of today's gathering, not merely planning for eventual transfer, but facilitating an immediate housing solution already promised without my knowledge or consent. The presumption is so profound, it momentarily leaves me speechless. Thomas at least has the decency to look uncomfortable. "It's not exactly like that," he interjects, directing this toward our parents rather than me. Shannon and I discussed possibilities with Mom and Dad. They suggested the duplex might be available, not that it was definitely arranged. "Because Olivia has always been generous with family," my mother counters with pointed emphasis. "We had no reason to expect objection to helping your brother during this important life transition." The reimagining of my property as communal family asset available for redistribution represents a fundamental misunderstanding or deliberate misrepresentation of ownership rights. That this misunderstanding persists despite 6 years of mortgage, statements in my name, tax documents under my Social Security number, and property insurance on my policy reveals a willful cognitive dissonance that no rational explanation seems capable of penetrating. I understand Thomas's housing needs are pressing, I acknowledge, directing my response to my brother rather than my parents. That's significant and deserves serious consideration. However, transferring legal ownership of a major asset requires proper process, not rushed decisions. Process, paperwork, technicalities, my mother dismisses with familiar impatience. This is about family, not corporate protocols. Actually, I correct gently, property transfer involves legal obligations, tax implications, and financial responsibilities that exist regardless of family relationships. These aren't technicalities, but substantive considerations that protect everyone involved. "Always the lawyer," Rebecca interjects with undisguised derision, despite my lack of legal credentials. "Can't you just be a sister for once instead of a financial analyst?" Her false dichotomy attempts to position professional consideration as mutually exclusive with familial affection, a recurring theme in our family's emotional manipulation playbook. The framework suggests that careful deliberation somehow indicates diminished love rather than responsible stewardship. Being a thoughtful sister includes ensuring decisions are sustainable for everyone. I respond evenly. Rushed. Property transfers without proper consultation could create more problems than solutions. My father's expression shifts from persuasive to resigned, suggesting an alternative approach has been prepared for this contingency. He exchanges a glance with my mother before retrieving another document from the folder. "We hope to handle this through family discussion," he states with performative reluctance, "but perhaps more formal measures will address your concerns." He extends a single-page document that appears to be a letter, rather than a legal instrument. This might clarify our position more effectively. I accept the paper, immediately recognizing the letterhead of First Municipal Bank, the institution holding the mortgage on my duplex property. The letter, addressed to my parents rather than me, references your investment property at 742 Westfield Avenue and outlines refinancing options that would allow consolidation of existing debts while transferring the asset to the family trust as discussed. The document confirms suspicions that had been forming throughout our conversation. This isn't merely a spontaneous redistribution plan, but a coordinated financial strategy developed without my knowledge, involving not just the property, but apparent debt consolidation needs I wasn't aware existed. "You've been discussing refinancing my mortgage with my bank?" I ask, the professional composure I've maintained throughout the conversation finally showing cracks of genuine surprise. "Our mortgage," my father corrects with misplaced confidence. "The property has always been a family investment, regardless of whose name appears on paperwork." "That's not how property law works," I respond, struggling to maintain equanimity in the face of such fundamental misrepresentation. The name on the deed and mortgage determines legal ownership, not informal family understandings. Which is precisely why we need to correct the paperwork to reflect the reality of our arrangement, my mother counters, revealing her genuine belief in this alternative interpretation of property rights. The disconnect between legal reality and my family's perception transcends simple misunderstanding. Their confidence suggests years of reinforced belief that my financial contributions represent communal resources rather than personal assets, a narrative they've apparently maintained, not just within family conversations but in external business discussions with financial institutions. "The bank wouldn't discuss my mortgage with you without my authorization," I note, identifying the procedural inconsistency. My parents exchange another meaningful glance before my father responds with reluctant disclosure. "We used the power of attorney you provided 3 years ago when we were handling the rental unit renovation while you were in London for that extended project." The limited power of attorney, intended for specific property management tasks during my temporary international assignment, had apparently been interpreted as ongoing authorization for financial decisions regarding the property. This revelation transforms my understanding from familial misunderstanding to potential legal misrepresentation. "That power of attorney expired upon my return," I state carefully, recalling the specific 3-month limitation explicitly included in the document. It was temporary and purpose-specific. "The bank didn't question it," my mother responds with disturbing casualness. "They've always known we manage the property." The implications cascade through my consciousness like falling dominoes. Unauthorized communications with financial institutions, misrepresentation of legal authority, potential attempted mortgage fraud, all conducted with such conviction in their entitlement that they openly acknowledge these actions without apparent concern for their impropriety. Thomas shifts uncomfortably on the sofa, clearly recognizing the serious nature of these revelations. "I didn't know about any of this," he offers, distancing himself from the developing situation. "I just knew Mom and Dad said the property could be available." "Of course you didn't," I assure him, recognizing he's likely been positioned as beneficiary rather than architect of this scenario. This appears to involve several layers of misunderstanding. My deliberate understatement attempts to provide temporary de-escalation while I process the full implications. The situation has evolved from family disagreement about asset distribution to potential financial misrepresentation with serious legal implications, a distinction requiring careful navigation. "There's no misunderstanding," my father insists with the authoritative tone that once ended childhood disagreements. "The property was always intended as a family investment. Your name appears on documents for convenience, not exclusivity." "That's not accurate," I respond firmly, transitioning from conciliatory to definitive. "I researched the property independently, qualified for the mortgage based on my credit history and income, provided the entire down payment from my personal savings, and have made every mortgage payment from my individual accounts for 4 years. These facts establish clear ownership, not convenient administrative arrangement. After we identified the investment opportunity, my mother counters, rewriting history with remarkable confidence. Your father found the property and recognized its potential. We simply didn't qualify for financing at our age. This revisionist narrative attempts to transform my ownership into mere technicality, casting me as convenient financing vehicle rather than property investor. The casual erasure of my agency, research, and financial acumen reveals a familial pattern so ingrained it operates almost automatically, diminishing my contributions while amplifying others' involvement. I need to be absolutely clear, I state, abandoning diplomatic language for direct communication. The duplex is legally my property. I never authorized permanent power of attorney, mortgage refinancing discussions, or property transfer arrangements. Any representations to financial institutions suggesting otherwise would constitute misrepresentation. The statement lands with unexpected impact, suggesting my parents genuinely believed their narrative, rather than deliberately misrepresenting circumstances. My father's expression shifts from authoritative to confused, while my mother's transitions from confident to defensive. You're overreacting, she insists, retreating to familiar emotional territory when factual discussion proves unfavorable. No one has misrepresented anything. We've simply been exploring options for transitioning the property to benefit Thomas during an important life change. Options that fundamentally misrepresent ownership rights, I clarify, maintaining factual focus rather than engaging the emotional deflection. My father rises suddenly, moving toward his study with purpose rather than agitation. Perhaps this will clarify matters once and for all, he announces, returning moments later with another document, this one older and slightly worn at the edges from handling. He presents it with absolute conviction. This established our arrangement from the beginning. The paper appears to be a simple agreement, typed but not professionally formatted, with signatures at the bottom. The document, dated 4 years ago during the property purchase period, states that the property at 742 Westfield Avenue, while legally registered to Olivia Reed for financing purposes, represents a family investment with mutual decision-making, authority, and eventual distribution according to family needs, as determined by Edward and Maria Reed. I study the document with growing disbelief, immediately recognizing several concerns. The language contradicts standard property law principles. The format lacks legal validation markers, and most significantly, the signature attributed to me bears little resemblance to my actual handwriting. I never signed this, I state unequivocally, the professional restraint I've maintained throughout our interaction finally giving way to genuine distress. This isn't my signature. Of course you signed it, my mother insists with absolute conviction. We all did, right here at this table the week before closing. No, I counter firmly. I never saw this document before today, let alone signed. This signature is not mine. The room falls silent as the implication settles over our gathering. My father stares at the document with newfound uncertainty, while my mother's expression hardens into defensive indignation. The twins exchange uncomfortable glances, clearly recognizing the situation has escalated beyond family disagreement into potentially serious legal territory. Are you accusing us of forgery? My mother finally asks, her voice simultaneously incredulous and wounded. I'm stating an objective fact, I respond carefully. That is not my signature. I never authorized or acknowledged any arrangement recharacterizing my property ownership. My father examines the signature more closely, his expression shifting from confidence to confusion. Perhaps there was a misunderstanding, he offers, the first acknowledgement of potential impropriety. We discussed this arrangement extensively. I was certain you had signed. I never signed any document limiting or recharacterizing my ownership rights, I state with absolute certainty. The property was purchased as my individual investment, with the understanding that you would help manage the rental aspects while I handled the financial obligations. The revelation creates a pivotal moment of clarity, not just regarding the property dispute, but concerning our entire family dynamic. What I had interpreted as simple entitlement or misunderstanding now appears as something more deliberate. The systematic appropriation of my resources justified through reconstructed narratives and, apparently, falsified documentation. This understanding doesn't negate my love for my family, but fundamentally transforms how I perceive my responsibility to them, and more importantly, to myself. The secondary deed structure my attorney recommended as insurance now represents not mere precaution, but necessary protection against active attempts to circumvent my ownership rights. In this moment of painful clarity, I recognize that continuing to navigate this situation requires neither emotional confrontation nor immediate disclosure of the protective measures I've implemented. Instead, it demands strategic reassessment of boundaries that have clearly eroded beyond recognition. I think we need to conclude this discussion, I state calmly, rising from my chair with deliberate composure. I'll be consulting with my attorney regarding both the property situation and this document. You would bring lawyers into a family matter? My mother demands, her tone suggesting this represents the true betrayal rather than the apparent forgery before us. This became a legal matter when unauthorized communication with financial institutions and potentially falsified documents became involved, I respond factually. My responsibility now is to ensure proper resolution through appropriate channels. As I gather my belongings, the weight of this revelation settles across my shoulders, not as burden, but as clarity. The uncomfortable truth offers liberation from unsustainable expectations and manipulation disguised as family obligation. The property, valuable as it is, represents merely the visible manifestation of deeper boundary violations that require comprehensive resolution. My parents watch in stunned silence as I prepare to leave, perhaps finally recognizing that their orchestrated scenario has collapsed under scrutiny, or perhaps simply calculating alternative approaches to achieve their desired outcome. The twins exhibit contrasting reactions. Rebecca's irritation at interrupted plans versus Thomas's apparent relief that potentially problematic actions have been exposed before further escalation. As I move toward the door, Thomas follows, speaking quietly away from the others. I didn't know about any document or bank discussions, he assures me. Shannon and I can find another housing solution. This isn't worth damaging the family. His sincerity appears genuine, suggesting his role as beneficiary rather than architect of the situation. I understand, I respond with genuine empathy for his position. This isn't about denying support for your growing family, but addressing concerning actions regarding my property. We'll find appropriate solutions once the legal aspects are clarified. As I drive away from my parents' home, the autumn leaves swirling in my wake, I experience not grief or anger, but profound clarification. The property they attempted to redistribute was never the true asset at stake. It was my autonomy, my boundaries, and my right to determine how my resources are allocated. The secondary deed structure, created 3 years ago as precautionary protection, now represents not paranoia, but prescience. What I couldn't have anticipated was that the threat to my investment would come not from external factors, but from within the family system I had dedicated myself to supporting. The evening air feels unusually crisp as I drive away from my parents' suburban neighborhood, the familiar route back to Cambridge, appearing somehow altered though the roads remain unchanged. Traffic lights cast alternating patterns of red and green across my windshield. Stop and go, danger and safety, boundaries and passage, visual metaphors for the decision points that now lie before me. I take the longer scenic route along the Cha River, needing additional transition time before returning to my apartment. The Charles River reflects the city lights like scattered diamonds on black velvet, a reminder that even in darkness, beauty and clarity can emerge. My hands grip the steering wheel with unnecessary firmness, a physical manifestation of the control I'm desperately trying to maintain over my emotional response. The weight of revelation presses against my consciousness, not just the attempted property appropriation, which I had somehow intuited might be coming, but the apparent falsification of documents and misrepresentation to financial institutions. These actions transcend simple misunderstanding or entitlement, suggesting a deliberate orchestration that fundamentally recharacterizes our family dynamic. As I navigate the winding Riverside Parkway, I conduct a systematic inventory of financial connections between myself and my family, a professional habit of comprehensive assessment applied to personal crisis. Monthly mortgage transfer to cover my parents' home, $2,800. Property tax and insurance supplements, $600. Thomas's education loan payments, $450. Rebecca's car payment, $350. Various family emergency fund contributions, approximately $1,200 monthly average. Christmas and birthday gifts, roughly $12,000 annually. Vacation subsidies, approximately $8,000 annually. Healthcare supplement for uncovered parental medical expenses, varying but averaging $6,000 annually. The total exceeds $75,000 annually, nearly 40% of my post-tax income directed toward family support, while simultaneously funding my retirement accounts, maintaining my modest lifestyle, and building the investment portfolio that represents my financial future. This mathematical reality contradicts my mother's assertion that family doesn't keep ledgers. Someone has indeed been keeping precise accounts, me, while simultaneously being characterized as obsessively transactional for acknowledging these contributions. The cognitive dissonance is staggering. I pull into a scenic overlook parking area, needing a moment to process before continuing home. The Boston skyline shimmers in the distance, the financial district's illuminated towers housing the offices where I'll return Monday morning to advise clients on protecting their assets and optimizing their investments. The irony doesn't escape me, professional expertise valued in the marketplace, yet dismissed within family boundaries. My phone displays 17 missed calls and 23 text messages in the hour since my departure, a digital manifestation of the emotional tsunami I left behind. I scan the notifications without opening any messages, noting escalating tone from confusion to concern to indignation to accusation. The predictable progression confirms that genuine reflection hasn't yet penetrated the family system's defensive response. One text from Thomas stands apart. I truly didn't know about any document or bank discussions. Call me when you can talk privately. His consistent discomfort throughout the encounter suggests his role as beneficiary rather than architect of the situation, a position that warrants separate consideration from my parents' actions. His impending fatherhood introduces complexity to an already complicated situation, requiring balanced approach between appropriate boundaries and compassionate support. I rest my forehead against the steering wheel, allowing myself a moment of uncharacteristic vulnerability in the privacy of my vehicle. The physical gesture provides momentary relief from the perfect posture I've maintained throughout this confrontation, both literally in my carefully controlled body language and figuratively in my measured responses. Unexpected tears form, not from sadness, but from clarity. The profound recognition that the family dynamic I've dedicated myself to sustaining through financial support and personal sacrifice doesn't actually exist in the form I've believed. The realization isn't destroying something precious, but rather acknowledging what was already broken beneath the surface, a necessary step toward authentic resolution. After several minutes of this private emotional release, I straighten and restart the car, continuing my journey home with newfound resolve. By the time I reach my Cambridge apartment building, a decision framework has formed. neither reactive withdrawal nor unconditional continuation, but strategic recalibration, based on documented reality rather than emotional manipulation. My apartment welcomes me with familiar minimalist comfort, the space I've maintained as functional rather than luxurious now appearing in a different light. What I previously perceived as temporary accommodation subordinated to family priorities now represents the physical manifestation of my diminished self-prioritization. The sparse furnishings and practical amenities reflect not financial limitation, but psychological constraint, resources directed outward rather than invested in my immediate environment. I move methodically through my evening routine, changing clothes, preparing tea, organizing materials for review, while continuing to process the afternoon's revelations. The professional discipline that serves me in managing client crises provides structure for navigating personal upheaval. At my desk, I retrieve the hidden deed documentation from my fire-resistant safe, the legal structure established 3 years ago that my attorney had characterized as excessive precaution, now appearing prescient. The secondary deed creates an irrevocable trust with specific transfer conditions that would prevent any attempted property reassignment without my explicit, notarized consent. This protection, implemented after discovering Thomas's gambling problem, had felt almost disloyal. At the time, a secret insurance policy against family members I claimed to trust implicitly. Now it represents not paranoia but necessary foresight, though for reasons I couldn't have anticipated. The threat came not from Thomas's financial instability, but from my parents' systematic appropriation disguised as family redistribution. My laptop screen illuminates with banking records documenting every mortgage payment, property tax contribution, insurance premium, and renovation expense associated with the duplex property. A comprehensive financial history establishing indisputable ownership through consistent action rather than disputed documents. The evidence contradicts any narrative attempting to characterize my ownership as mere convenience or administrative arrangement. I then expand my financial audit beyond the property dispute to encompass all family-directed resources, creating spreadsheets detailing every transfer, payment, and contribution over the past 6 years. The visualization transforms abstract understanding into concrete recognition, a one-directional flow of resources without corresponding reciprocity, acknowledgement, or consultation regarding allocation. This isn't merely financial imbalance, but fundamental relationship asymmetry, my role reduced to resource provider rather than respected family member with agency and boundaries. The pattern appears not as recent development, but as established system deliberately maintained through emotional manipulation, selective appreciation, and apparent documentation falsification when necessary. My phone continues accumulating notifications, family members escalating contact attempts with increasing urgency. The pattern mirrors previous occasions when I've attempted to establish even minor boundaries, though with intensified frequency, given the significant financial implications of today's confrontation. Rather than engaging this reactive communication cycle, I compose a single email addressed to my parents with the twins copied. Subject: Property clarification and next steps. Dear Mom and Dad, after today's discussion, I need to establish clarity regarding the duplex property at 742 Westfield Avenue. To prevent further misunderstanding, 1. I am the sole legal owner of the property, with exclusive rights regarding its management, occupancy, and potential transfer. 2. The document presented today purporting to establish alternative ownership arrangements bears a signature that is not mine. I have never signed any agreement limiting or recharacterizing my property rights. 3. The temporary power of attorney granted during my London assignment expired upon my return 3 years ago. Any representation to financial institutions suggesting ongoing authority would constitute misrepresentation. 4. I will be consulting with my attorney regarding both the property situation and the questionable document presented today. Until legal review is complete, No communication should occur with financial institutions regarding this property, and no promises should be made to Thomas and Shannon regarding potential occupancy. I recognize this situation creates uncertainty regarding Thomas and Shannon's housing plans. I am not opposed to considering appropriate arrangements that might support them during this important life transition, but such arrangements must respect legal ownership boundaries and occur through proper channels. I'll be unavailable by phone this weekend as I process these developments and consult appropriate advisors. I ask that you respect this temporary communication boundary. Olivia. The message establishes factual parameters without accusatory language, while implementing temporary communication boundaries that provide necessary space for strategic planning rather than reactive engagement. The approach balances professional clarity with recognition of legitimate family concerns regarding Thomas's housing situation. After sending the email, I implement systematic communication management, silencing notifications, activating email filters to organize incoming family messages for later review, and sending a separate text to Thomas acknowledging his message and confirming we'll speak privately next week. These practical actions provide immediate structure while I develop comprehensive response strategy addressing both the specific property dispute and the broader family dynamic requiring fundamental recalibration. I prepare chamomile tea and move to my small balcony overlooking the Cambridge skyline. The autumn evening has turned cool, prompting me to wrap a light blanket around my shoulders. The physical comfort contrasts with the emotional discomfort of recognizing painful truths about relationships I've idealized despite contradictory evidence. From this quiet vantage point, I begin mentally drafting the framework for moving forward, not with angry withdrawal or wounded capitulation, but with deliberate reconstruction based on authentic boundaries rather than manipulated obligation. The property dispute, while significant, represents merely the visible manifestation of systemic dysfunction requiring comprehensive reconfiguration. My professional training in strategic problem-solving provides unexpected personal benefit. The ability to separate emotional reaction from effective response, to identify leverage points within complex systems, and to implement measured solutions that protect core interests while minimizing collateral damage. The duplex property now holds dual significance, both financial investment and symbolic boundary. Its protection through the hidden deed structure I established years earlier feels almost like a message from my past self to my present reality, evidence that some part of me recognized the dysfunctional patterns long before I consciously acknowledged them. As darkness deepens across the city, lights illuminating individual windows in surrounding buildings, I experience unexpected calm replacing the turmoil of recent hours. The clarity of revealed truth, however painful, provides foundation for authentic reconstruction rather than continued participation in unsustainable patterns. Tomorrow, I'll contact my attorney to review the situation comprehensively. Not merely the property protection, but the apparent document falsification and potential financial misrepresentation requiring formal response. Tonight, however, is for integration, allowing the factual revelations to align with emotional recognition in preparation for measured action. The family narrative characterizing me as calculated or obsessed with money when I establish basics boundaries reveals itself as projection rather than accurate assessment. The truly calculated actions appear in the orchestrated property transfer attempt, the apparent document falsification, and the emotional manipulation designed to facilitate resource appropriation. This recognition doesn't diminish my love for my family, but transforms how I understand my responsibility to them, and more importantly, to myself. The path forward requires neither emotional confrontation nor complete withdrawal, but strategic recalibration, establishing sustainable parameters for future engagement. As I prepare for sleep later that evening, I notice subtle shifts in my physical environment. The apartment that previously felt like temporary accommodation between family obligations now represents protected space for authentic self-development. The minimal furnishings that once reflected redirected resources now appear as foundation for intentional reconstruction according to my actual preferences rather than externally imposed expectations. I fall asleep not with anxiety about impending family conflict, but with surprising peace. The relief that accompanies alignment between perception and reality after prolonged cognitive dissonance. The hidden deed structure protecting my property from unauthorized transfer seems almost symbolic of the internal boundaries now emerging to protect my broader well-being from systematic appropriation. Tomorrow will bring practical challenges requiring strategic navigation, but tonight offers the quiet certainty that protecting your resources, financial, emotional, and psychological, isn't selfishness but necessary stewardship. The recognition that establishing boundaries doesn't diminish love, but rather creates foundation for authentic relationship based on mutual respect rather than unilateral extraction. The property my parents attempted to redistribute was never the true asset at stake. It was my autonomy, my boundaries, and my right to determine how my resources are allocated according to my values rather than others' expectations. This understanding doesn't represent loss, but liberation. The opportunity to reconstruct relationships based on mutual respect rather than systematic imbalance justified through manipulated obligation. Sunday morning arrives with surprising tranquility. Sunlight filters through east-facing windows, casting geometric patterns across my apartment's hardwood floors. The expected anxiety about family conflict remains conspicuously absent, replaced by the quiet determination that accompanies clarity of purpose. My phone, silenced overnight, displays the digital evidence of escalating resistance: 38 missed calls, 64 text messages, and 23 emails from various family members. The volume confirms my decision to establish temporary communication boundaries was warranted. Unfiltered engagement would have consumed the night with reactive exchanges rather than strategic planning. I maintain this digital distance while completing my usual Sunday morning routine, yoga practice, protein-rich breakfast, and focused planning for the week ahead. These habits, cultivated through years of professional discipline, provide structural stability during personal turbulence. The familiar movements and activities ground me in present reality rather than emotional projection. At precisely 9:30 a.m., I contact Victoria Chen, my attorney, whose foresight established the protective deed structure 3 years earlier. Despite the weekend timing, she responds within minutes. Our professional relationship built on mutual respect and reasonable accommodation for genuine urgency. This confirms your concerns weren't excessive caution after all, she observes after I summarize yesterday's confrontation. The secondary deed structure prevents exactly this scenario: attempted transfer without your explicit consent. What concerns me most isn't the property attempt itself, but the apparently falsified document, I explain. That suggests premeditated action rather than misunderstanding. Document falsification introduces serious implications, Victoria agrees. I recommend preserving all evidence, including the original document if possible, and scheduling a formal consultation tomorrow. Meanwhile, your email established appropriate boundaries. Maintain that communication structure until we've developed comprehensive strategy. The validation from a respected professional provides additional confirmation that my perception isn't distorted by emotional reaction, but accurately aligned with legal reality. This external verification counterbalances the gaslighting attempts, positioning my ownership claims as technicalities rather than substantive rights. After concluding the call, I review the accumulated messages using the filtering system implemented last night. The content reveals predictable patterns. My mother's communications oscillate between wounded indignation, "After everything we've done for you," and manipulative concern, "We're worried about your mental state," while my father's maintain pseudo-rational tone disguising fundamental misrepresentation. Let's discuss this misunderstanding calmly. Rebecca's messages demonstrate characteristic dismissiveness, always making everything about money instead of family, while Thomas's communications remain more measured, acknowledging the situation's complexity while maintaining familial loyalty. I understand your position, but hope we can resolve this without permanent damage. The collective narrative emerges with remarkable consistency. My boundary enforcement is characterized as betrayal rather than legitimate protection, while the attempted appropriation of my property is positioned as reasonable family redistribution. This inversion attempts to place moral burden on the boundary setter rather than the boundary violator, a classic manipulation tactic I've encountered in professional negotiations but failed to recognize within family dynamics. At noon, the digital resistance escalates to physical manifestation when my building's security desk calls to inform me that my mother has arrived unannounced, insisting on immediate access to my apartment. "I've explained you're not accepting visitors, Ms. Reed," the security officer explains professionally. However, she's becoming increasingly insistent. "Thank you for maintaining the boundary," I respond, appreciating the structural protection my building's security protocols provide. "Please inform her that I'm unavailable today and suggest she return home. If she refuses to leave the premises, follow standard protocol for unauthorized visitors." This measured response maintains appropriate boundaries without unnecessary confrontation, utilizing established systems rather than engaging emotional escalation. The approach reflects my developing framework for addressing the broader family situation. Strategic implementation of structural boundaries rather than reactive emotional engagement. 20 minutes later, my security system alerts me to an attempted electronic entry, someone using the emergency key code I had provided to my parents 3 years ago for genuine emergencies. The system's upgrade last year included code modification, rendering the previous access method ineffective. This attempted boundary violation confirms the necessity of comprehensive protection across multiple domains: financial, physical, and communicational. My mother's voice echoes through the hallway security system. "Olivia, I know you're in there. We need to talk immediately. This situation is getting out of hand." The irony of her statement, characterizing my boundary enforcement rather than their attempted property appropriation as out of hand, would be almost humorous if not for the seriousness of the escalating pattern. Her unauthorized appearance, despite explicit communication boundaries, represents another data point confirming systematic disregard for consent and autonomy. I maintain silence, allowing building security to address the situation according to established protocols. 15 minutes later, the security desk confirms my mother has left the premises after being informed that continued unauthorized attempts would necessitate formal intervention. This physical boundary testing mirrors the pattern documented in psychological literature about established family systems facing disruption. When implicit expectations are challenged, resistance typically progresses through predictable stages: confusion, negotiation, emotional manipulation, and finally direct intervention attempts. My mother's progression through this sequence within 24 hours suggests deeply entrenched patterns requiring comprehensive rather than incremental response. By mid-afternoon, the resistance adopts new vector when extended family members begin contacting me, first my mother's sister Aunt Caroline, then my father's brother Uncle Philip, followed by 3 cousins with whom I maintain minimal communication. The synchronized timing suggests orchestrated deployment rather than spontaneous concern. Aunt Caroline's voicemail exemplifies the narrative being disseminated. "Olivia, your mother called in tears. Something about you threatening legal action. Against your own parents? And poor Thomas and his pregnant fiancée possibly homeless? This doesn't sound like you, dear. Call me so I can understand what's really happening." The selective information sharing creates incomplete narrative designed to generate external pressure without acknowledging attempted property appropriation or document falsification. This approach, mobilizing extended family as pressure vectors, based on partial information, represents another familiar manipulation tactic. Rather than engaging these secondary communications individually, I compose a brief, factual response to be shared with extended family if direct contact continues. I appreciate your concern. There's a complex situation involving my investment property that's being addressed through appropriate channels. While I understand you've received certain information, please recognize you may not have complete context. I'm committed to reasonable resolution that respects legal boundaries while supporting family where appropriate. Thank you for understanding that specific details require privacy during resolution. This message acknowledges concern without defensive justification, establishes existence of additional context without accusatory elaboration, and maintains appropriate privacy boundaries without appearing secretive. The balanced approach prevents extended family manipulation while preserving dignity for all parties. By evening, the resistance pattern evolves further when Thomas texts, "Mom and Dad have invited Shannon's parents over tomorrow to discuss alternative housing arrangements, since the duplex situation is temporarily delayed. Just wanted you to know they're presenting it as a minor setback that you'll eventually come around on, rather than a legitimate dispute." This information confirms my parents are maintaining the narrative of eventual compliance rather than accepting the reality of established boundaries. Their continued promises regarding property they don't own demonstrates either profound disconnection from legal reality or deliberate misrepresentation to external parties, both concerning possibilities requiring documented correction. I respond to Thomas with measured appreciation. Thank you for sharing this information. I understand this creates an uncomfortable position for you and Shannon. To prevent further misrepresentation, I've instructed my attorney to send formal clarification to all parties tomorrow regarding property ownership and decision rights. This isn't intended to complicate your housing situation, but to establish necessary factual parameters for any future discussions. His response arrives quickly. I get it. Shannon and I are exploring other options anyway. This situation is becoming too complicated, and we don't want our baby becoming leverage in family disputes. This exchange suggests potential for reasonable engagement with at least one family member. Thomas demonstrates capacity for recognizing complexity and seeking alternative solutions rather than insisting on entitlement to my property. This distinction may prove valuable in eventually reconstructing healthier family dynamics with appropriate individuals once immediate boundaries are secured. As Sunday evening approaches, I prepare for the professional week ahead, reviewing client portfolios, organizing presentation materials, and establishing priority sequences for various projects. This deliberate focus on professional responsibilities provides both productive distraction and reassuring normalcy amid personal disruption. The contrast between my professional and personal environments becomes increasingly apparent. In workplace contexts, my expertise receives recognition and respect. My boundaries encounter acknowledgement rather than resistance, and my contributions generate appropriate appreciation. These elements have remained conspicuously absent in family dynamics, despite substantial financial and emotional investment. This recognition doesn't suggest abandoning family connection, but rather reconstructing it according to the same principles of mutual respect and balanced exchange that characterize healthy professional relationships. The property dispute, while significant, represents merely the visible manifestation of systemic imbalance requiring comprehensive recalibration. Before concluding Sunday's planning session, I implement additional protective measures across various domains. Financial: temporarily freeze automatic transfers to family accounts pending comprehensive review. Communication: establish specific time windows for reviewing family messages rather than allowing constant interruption. Professional: alert executive assistant to potential unusual family contact attempts at office. Physical: update building security protocols regarding authorized visitors. Legal: prepare documentation package for Monday's attorney consultation. These systematic protections create structural foundation for boundary maintenance without requiring constant vigilance or emotional engagement. The approach transforms boundary enforcement from exhausting individual effort to sustainable systematic implementation. As I prepare for sleep Sunday night, I experience unexpected lightness despite the conflict's seriousness. The paradox reveals profound truth. Maintaining appropriate boundaries, while initially requiring significant energy investment, ultimately conserves more resources than continuous acquiescence to inappropriate expectations. My apartment, previously viewed as temporary accommodation between family obligations, now represents personal sanctuary where autonomous decisions replace external impositions. The space feels different not because of physical changes but perceptual transformation, recognizing this environment as legitimately mine rather than provisionally occupied. Monday morning arrives with crystalline clarity, both literally in Nadaisyan, the bright autumn sunshine streaming through windows, and figuratively in my resolution regarding next steps. The professional week begins with structured purpose, my 7:30 a.m. arrival at Morgan Financial's offices providing familiar environment, where competence generates consistent recognition. By 9:00 a.m., Victoria confirms our noon consultation with preliminary assessment. The secondary deed structure provides comprehensive protection against attempted transfer. What requires addressing is the apparent document falsification and potential financial misrepresentation. We'll develop appropriate response strategy during our meeting. At 10:15 a.m., my executive assistant Jeremy interrupts a client call preparation. Ms. Reed, your mother and father are in the reception area insisting on immediate meeting. They claim it's a family emergency requiring your attention. Security is awaiting your instructions. The escalation to workplace intervention, despite clear communication boundaries and explicit request for temporary space, confirms the systematic nature of boundary violations. This pattern extends beyond property disputes or miscommunication into fundamental disregard for consent and autonomy across multiple domains. Please inform them I'm unavailable due to client commitments, I respond calmly. They should direct any communication to my attorney, whose contact information they received this morning. If they refuse to leave, please implement standard protocol for unauthorized visitors. Jeremy nods with professional understanding, having managed similar situations with overzealous clients in the past. Understood. I'll handle this appropriately. The boundary enforcement produces immediate resistance escalation. My phone displays 6 successive calls from my parents within 5 minutes, followed by text messages alternating between urgent demands. This is humiliating having security. Escort us from your office building. Call immediately. And emotional manipulation. Is your career really more important than family? We raised you better than this. Rather than engaging this reactive cycle, I maintain focus on client presentation preparation, allowing building security to implement established protocols without personal intervention. This compartmentalization, maintaining professional performance, while addressing personal challenges through appropriate channels, represents another form of boundary implementation. By noon, Victoria's office provides sanctuary for strategic consultation rather than emotional processing. The professional environment facilitates analytical approach to situations that might otherwise generate primarily emotional response. Based on documentation you've provided, Victoria begins after reviewing my materials. We're addressing multiple distinct issues: property ownership protection, apparent document falsification, financial misrepresentation to institutions, and appropriate boundary establishment. Let's develop comprehensive strategy addressing each component while minimizing unnecessary escalation. This methodical approach transforms overwhelming family conflict into manageable strategic components, each requiring specific response rather than generalized emotional reaction. The framework provides path forward based on procedural clarity, rather than retaliatory impulse or conflict avoidance. As we develop implementation plan for each component, unexpected emotion surfaces. not anger toward my family's actions or anxiety about potential conflict, but profound gratitude for having established protective measures before they became urgently necessary. The hidden deed structure created 3 years earlier now represents not paranoia, but prescience, evidence that some part of me recognized concerning patterns long before conscious acknowledgement. This realization offers perhaps the most important insight of recent days. Authentic self-protection doesn't require vilifying others, but simply acknowledging patterns and implementing appropriate safeguards. My family's behavior reflects their limitations rather than my worth, while my boundary implementation represents self-respect rather than family rejection. With this clarity guiding strategic planning, the path forward emerges not as battle plan, but as reconstruction blueprint, establishing sustainable parameters within which relationship might eventually be reconstructed on foundation of mutual respect rather than systematic exploitation. The property my parents attempted to redistribute was never the true asset at stake. It was my autonomy, my boundaries, and my right to determine how my resources are allocated. Protecting these fundamental elements doesn't require severing connection, but rather establishing conditions under which authentic connection becomes possible. As Victoria outlines next steps for formal documentation and appropriate legal notices, I experience the quiet confidence that accompanies alignment between values and actions. The resistance encountered thus far confirms not that boundaries are unreasonable but that they are necessary, addressing deeply entrenched patterns rather than isolated incidents. Victoria's law office provides more than legal consultation. It offers perspective unavailable within the emotional turbulence of family conflict. The panoramic windows overlooking Boston Harbor create both literal and figurative distance from the situation, allowing strategic consideration rather than reactive response. Based on the evidence you've provided, I recommend a 3-tiered approach, Victoria explains, organizing documents into precise stacks. First, formal notice to all parties clarifying property ownership and the deed protection structure. Second, documented response regarding the apparently falsified agreement. Third, structured communication parameters establishing appropriate boundaries moving forward. The methodology transforms overwhelming emotional complexity into manageable procedural components. Each element requires specific documentation, timeline considerations, and implementation strategies, creating comprehensive framework rather than piecemeal reaction. The secondary deed structure you established functions precisely as intended, Victoria continues, displaying the relevant documentation. It creates irrevocable protection requiring your explicit, notarized consent for any ownership transfer. No signature on family documents, genuine or otherwise, can override this protection. This confirmation provides foundational security from which other aspects can be addressed. The property remains legally protected regardless of external pressure tactics or manipulative narratives. This certainty creates capacity for addressing broader dynamics without fear of immediate asset vulnerability. By meeting's conclusion, we've established clear implementation sequence. 1. Formal legal notice to all parties regarding property ownership status. 2. Documented inquiry regarding the questionable signature on family documents. 3. Structured communication parameters establishing professional intermediary for property discussions. 4. Temporary financial restructuring pausing automated family transfers, pending comprehensive review. 5. Workplace protection protocols regarding unauthorized intervention attempts. The procedural clarity creates immediate psychological relief, transforming amorphous conflict into defined processes with specific timelines and expected outcomes. This structural approach leverages my professional strengths while minimizing emotional vulnerability during necessary transitions. One final recommendation, Victoria adds as our session concludes. Consider creating physical distance during the initial implementation phase. Your family has demonstrated willingness to appear at your workplace and residence despite explicit Boundaries. Temporary relocation might provide necessary space for both procedural implementation and personal recalibration. The suggestion resonates immediately. My apartment, while comfortable, represents the geographic center of established patterns, accessible for unannounced visits, situated along familiar routes, and embedded within established family dynamics. Temporary relocation would create both physical and psychological distance from ingrained patterns while implementation proceeds. By late afternoon, I've arranged immediate short-term accommodations, a corporate housing unit in a secured building, on Boston's waterfront, typically reserved for visiting executives. The location provides both necessary amenities and enhanced security protocols, including restricted access elevator systems and 24-hour concierge services. The decision to temporarily relocate triggers unexpected emotional response, not anxiety, about leaving familiar surroundings but relief at establishing physical boundaries corresponding to psychological ones. The geographic distance creates tangible manifestation of the recalibration process underway across multiple domains. That evening, I pack essential items for 2 weeks while implementation proceeds: professional wardrobe, technology necessities, and minimal personal items. The deliberate minimalism feels appropriate for this transitional period, carrying forward only what serves immediate needs while creating space for intentional reconstruction. The contrast between my systematic preparation and my family's chaotic intervention attempts becomes increasingly apparent. Their approach demonstrates reactive escalation without strategic consideration, while my response follows deliberate implementation sequence aligned with professional expertise and legal guidance. The security desk calls to inform me that my mother has again appeared in the lobby, now accompanied by my father, both insisting on immediate access. They're claiming concern about your mental health and unusual behavior, the security officer explains with professional neutrality. Please inform them I'm unavailable and suggest they direct any concerns to my attorney, whose contact information they've received. I respond. If they refuse to leave, please implement standard protocol for unauthorized visitors. This measured response maintains appropriate boundaries without emotional engagement. The pattern confirms Victoria's recommendation regarding temporary relocation. My family's repeated boundary testing demonstrates unlikely cessation without structural intervention. By 9:00 p.m., I've transferred necessary items to the temporary accommodation and implemented additional security measures. Location sharing disabled on mobile devices. Social media accounts temporarily deactivated, and automated email responses established directing all non-professional communication to appropriate channels. These systematic protections create comprehensive boundary structure rather than piecemeal barriers requiring constant vigilance. The corporate housing unit offers unexpected psychological benefit beyond security considerations. Neutral environment untouched by established patterns or emotional associations. The contemporary furnishings, minimalist aesthetic, and harbor views create physical space aligned with the mental clarity emerging through recent revelations. As evening settles across the harbor, lights from passing boats create transient patterns on the ceiling, rhythmic reminders that movement itself often provides perspective unavailable from static positions. The temporary nature of these accommodations feels appropriately symbolic, transitional space facilitating transformation rather than permanent relocation signifying severance. The following morning begins with implementation of Victoria's structured approach. Her office dispatches formal legal notifications to all relevant parties: my parents, siblings, their attorney, and financial institutions, establishing unequivocal clarification regarding property ownership, transfer restrictions, and appropriate communication channels for any legitimate inquiries. The documentation includes explicit reference to the secondary deed structure, its legal implications, and the requirement for notarized consent for any ownership modification. This formal notification transforms subjective family disagreement into objective legal parameters, creating documented foundation for all subsequent discussions. The second notification addresses the document with questionable signature, requesting formal explanation regarding its origin, attestation regarding signature authenticity, and documentation of any witnesses to its purported execution. This approach provides opportunity for legitimate clarification while establishing formal record regarding potentially serious misrepresentation. By 10 a.m., implementation status updates arrive, all notifications successfully delivered, confirmation receipts documented, and initial responses tracked. The professional execution transforms abstract boundary concepts into concrete procedural implementation, creating structural foundation for necessary recalibration. My temporary office arrangement provides additional boundary reinforcement. Colleagues informed of family situation basics without unnecessary detail, reception protocols established regarding unauthorized visitors, and meeting schedule modified to minimize predictable availability patterns. These workplace protections maintain professional performance while addressing personal challenges through appropriate channels. Mid-morning brings predictable resistance escalation. Victoria's office reports multiple calls from my parents alternating between indignation regarding legal notices and attempts to establish direct communication bypassing established parameters. The pattern confirms systematic boundary testing rather than isolated incidents, validating comprehensive approach rather than incremental response. Their attorney has requested consultation regarding potential misunderstanding about property arrangements, Victoria informs me during our scheduled update call. I've scheduled discussion for tomorrow while maintaining appropriate information boundaries. This represents positive procedural engagement rather than continued emotional escalation. This development confirms the effectiveness of structured approach, shifting interaction from emotional manipulation to procedural engagement represents significant progress towards sustainable resolution. The framework transforms amorphous conflict into defined processes with specific parameters and appropriate professional mediation. My executive assistant Jeremy reports similar boundary testing at the office. Your father appeared at reception claiming urgent investment consultation necessity. When informed you were unavailable, he attempted to reach other advisors claiming existing client relationship. Security implemented appropriate protocols per your instructions. This workplace intervention attempt demonstrates the comprehensive nature of boundary violations, extending beyond property disputes into professional domain despite explicit parameters. The pattern confirms necessary protection across multiple contexts rather than isolated property concerns. By afternoon, the procedural implementation creates unexpected psychological benefit. Reduced hypervigilance resulting from systematic protections rather than individual enforcement efforts. The structural boundaries maintain effectiveness without requiring constant attention, creating mental space for professional performance and personal recalibration. The temporary accommodation provides evening sanctuary from intervention attempts, secured access protocols, unfamiliar location, and professional management, creating effective buffer between necessary boundary implementation and counterproductive confrontation. The physical distance facilitates emotional perspective unavailable within established geographic patterns. As evening approaches, I complete routine workday responsibilities from the temporary location, reviewing client portfolios, analyzing market projections, and preparing presentation materials for upcoming meetings. This deliberate focus on professional responsibilities provides both productive distraction and reassuring normalcy amid personal disruption. The harbor view from floor-to-ceiling windows offers different perspective than my Cambridge apartment. Expansive water vistas creating sense of possibility rather than limitation. Ships navigate established channels with methodical precision. Visual reminder that effective progress often follows structured pathways rather than impulsive diversions. An unexpected text from Thomas arrives. Shannon and I found an apartment. Near her parents. Not ideal, but workable for now. Dad's attorney contacted me about providing statement regarding family understanding of the property arrangement. Wanted you to know. This information confirms continued attempts at creating Alternative ownership narrative despite formal legal notifications. The approach suggests strategic, rather than merely reactive resistance, requiring comparable strategic response rather than emotional engagement. I forward Thomas's message to Victoria with brief assessment. Appears they're pursuing family. Understanding narrative despite formal notices. Anticipate potential affidavits from family members attesting to verbal agreements or implicit understandings contradicting legal documentation. Her response arrives promptly. Anticipated. This approach. Secondary deed structure specifically addresses and invalidates such claims. Will prepare additional documentation regarding exclusive decision rights. Family affidavits might create interpersonal complications, but cannot override legal protections. This exchange demonstrates the advantage of proactive protection measures. The secondary deed structure established years earlier specifically addresses attempted circumvention strategies now emerging. This foresight transforms potential vulnerability into secured protection, allowing measured response rather than defensive reaction. As darkness settles across the harbor, lights from surrounding buildings create constellation-like patterns against the night sky. The visual perspective offers metaphorical insight, individual points creating meaningful patterns when viewed from appropriate distance, just as individual actions reveal systematic patterns when observed with sufficient perspective. The temporary relocation provides exactly this necessary distance. Physical separation creating capacity for pattern recognition unavailable within established proximity. The geographic buffer allows objective assessment of systematic dynamics rather than reactive engagement with individual incidents. This realization offers profound insight regarding the path forward. Effective resolution requires addressing underlying patterns rather than isolated manifestations. The property dispute represents symptom rather than cause, visible expression of fundamental boundary disregard, requiring comprehensive recalibration rather than targeted intervention. With this understanding guiding implementation, I review tomorrow's scheduled activities, morning client presentations, midday update call with Victoria regarding attorney discussions, afternoon portfolio reviews, and evening market analysis. The deliberate focus on professional responsibilities maintains productive engagement, while procedural implementation addresses personal challenges through appropriate channels. Before concluding evening routines, I implement final boundary maintenance. Measure. Scheduling specific time window for reviewing filtered family communications rather than allowing continuous interruption throughout day. This structured approach transforms boundary maintenance from constant vigilance to scheduled activity, creating sustainable practice rather than exhausting defensive posture. The corporate housing unit's unfamiliar environment creates momentary disorientation when preparing for sleep. Different spatial arrangements requiring conscious navigation rather than automatic patterns. This physical adjustment mirrors the psychological recalibration underway, established patterns disrupted, in service to healthier configurations requiring initial conscious implementation before becoming natural operation. As harbor lights reflect across darkened water, creating luminous pathways across the surface, unexpected insight emerges. Authentic protection doesn't require permanent isolation, but rather appropriate boundaries facilitating genuine connection. The temporary distance creates capacity for potential future engagement based on mutual respect rather than extraction, establishing conditions for relationship reconstruction rather than permanent severance. The property my parents attempted to redistribute was never the true asset at stake. It was autonomy, boundaries, and resource allocation rights. Protecting these fundamental elements doesn't require rejecting family connection, but rather establishing parameters within which authentic connection becomes possible without systematic exploitation. With this clarity guiding implementation, temporary physical distance represents not withdrawal, but strategic positioning, creating necessary space for systematic recalibration while maintaining potential for future engagement under appropriate conditions. The approach transforms reactive boundary enforcement into strategic reconstruction, replacing defensive posture with intentional development of sustainable parameters. Morning sunlight transforms Boston Harbor into a canvas of shimmering gold, the water's surface capturing and reflecting light in constantly shifting patterns. From my temporary accommodations' panoramic windows, the city appears both familiar and fresh, known geography observed from new perspective. This visual shift mirrors the cognitive reframing underway in my understanding of family dynamics. Between client meetings and portfolio reviews, I dedicate focused research time to understanding the patterns emerging in my family situation. My analytical approach to investment strategy translates effectively to personal circumstances, identifying underlying patterns, researching relevant frameworks, and developing evidence-based response strategies rather than relying on emotional reactions. The corporate housing unit's dedicated office space becomes research headquarters, multiple browser windows displaying scholarly articles on family financial dynamics, books on establishing healthy boundaries, and legal resources regarding financial exploitation patterns. The systematic investigation transforms intuitive understanding into structured knowledge, replacing vague discomfort with specific concept recognition. An article on financial abuse patterns within families captures my attention with uncomfortable precision. Financial abuse often presents as systematic appropriation of resources justified through familial obligation, emotional manipulation, or revisionist narratives regarding asset ownership. The exploitation typically progresses from small boundary violations to significant resource extraction, with resistance to appropriate limitations characterized as betrayal of family loyalty. The clinical description matches my experience with disturbing accuracy. Progression from smaller financial assistance to attempted property appropriation, justification through family obligation narratives, and characterization of boundary enforcement as betrayal rather than legitimate protection. The pattern recognition confirms systematic rather than isolated dynamics, requiring comprehensive rather than incremental response. Another research article introduces relevant terminology. Family financial enmeshment occurs when appropriate boundaries regarding resources become blurred or deliberately distorted, creating obligation patterns that override individual autonomy. This often manifests in one-directional resource flow justified through role expectations rather than mutual agreement. The concept crystallizes my experience with clarifying precision, enmeshment rather than connection, extraction rather than exchange, obligation rather than collaboration. The terminology provides framework for understanding patterns previously difficult to articulate despite their tangible impact. During my scheduled update call with Victoria, I share these research insights and their relevance to our implementation strategy. These frameworks help us address underlying dynamics rather than just symptoms, I explain. The property dispute represents manifestation of systematic boundary issues requiring comprehensive recalibration. This contextual understanding strengthens our approach, Victoria agrees. My discussion with their attorney revealed familiar patterns, attempting to characterize legal ownership as technicality while emphasizing family understanding as supposedly superior claim. We maintained focus on documented legal reality rather than engaging emotional narratives. Her report confirms continuing attempts to prioritize subjective family understandings over objective legal documentation, despite formal notifications, establishing clear parameters. This persistent approach suggests deeply entrenched patterns requiring sustained rather than temporary boundary implementation. Their attorney requested meeting to discuss compromise arrangement regarding the property, Victoria continues. I've scheduled discussion for Friday while maintaining appropriate parameters. Their position appears to be evolving from dismissal toward negotiation, procedural progress even without substantive agreement. This development represents significant shift from initial response patterns, moving from dismissal of legitimate ownership toward acknowledgement of negotiation necessity. The transition confirms effective implementation of structural boundaries, creating foundation for potential resolution based on reality rather than manipulation. My research expands to include consultation with financial abuse specialist Dr. Eleanor Warren, whose expertise combines psychology and financial advisory disciplines. Our confidential discussion provides valuable contextual framing for my experiences. What you're describing follows classic patterns of financial enmeshment, Dr. Warren confirms after hearing summarized situation details. The progressive nature, from smaller contributions to major asset appropriation, typically indicates systematic rather than spontaneous behavior. The attempted property transfer represents escalation rather than isolated incident. Her professional assessment validates my emerging understanding. The property dispute signifies pattern culmination rather than anomalous occurrence. This framework transforms my perception from surprised victim of unexpected betrayal to informed respondent to predictable pattern progression. The falsified document suggests significant entitlement distortion, Dr. Warren continues. When customary manipulation proves insufficient for desired outcome, documentation falsification represents extreme boundary violation, indicating profound disconnection from appropriate limitations. This insight places the apparently falsified agreement in broader context, not merely procedural misconduct, but symbolic manifestation of fundamental boundary disregard. The behavior represents culmination of progressive pattern rather than isolated poor decision, confirming necessity for comprehensive rather than targeted response. What's most important to understand, Dr. Warren emphasizes, is that establishing appropriate boundaries doesn't constitute family rejection, but rather creates foundation for potential healthy relationship. Without these boundaries, authentic connection remains impossible because exploitation patterns supersede mutual respect. This perspective transforms my understanding of current implementation, not withdrawing from family connection, but establishing conditions under which genuine relationship might eventually become possible. The approach replaces false dichotomy between boundary enforcement and family loyalty with integrated understanding of appropriate limitations as prerequisite for authentic connection. By mid-afternoon, Victoria forwards significant development. Official? Response from my parents' attorney regarding the document with questionable signature. Our clients acknowledge possible misunderstanding regarding document execution. They maintain belief in family understanding regarding property arrangements, but recognize formal documentation may not reflect assumed agreements. They request direct discussion regarding potential resolution approaches. This carefully worded response neither confirms nor denies falsification while retreating from initial ownership claims toward negotiation positioning. The evolution from absolute entitlement assertion to compromise consideration represents significant progress, though without acknowledging fundamental boundary violations or legitimate ownership rights. Victoria's assessment accompanies the forwarded document. This represents tactical repositioning rather than substantive acknowledgement. They're attempting to shift from ownership claims toward negotiated access without addressing document authenticity concerns. We should maintain procedural engagement while preserving essential boundaries regarding ownership rights and appropriate compensation for any potential usage arrangements. Her analysis identifies the strategic adjustments underway, attempting to achieve practical objectives, property access, while avoiding accountability for inappropriate methods, document falsification. The approach requires maintaining fundamental boundaries while allowing procedural engagement that might facilitate appropriate resolution. My response focuses on core principles rather than reactive conditions. Agree with maintaining focus on documented legal reality while allowing appropriate discussion channels. Essential parameters must include acknowledgement of exclusive ownership rights, reasonable compensation for any usage consideration, and explicit recognition of boundary violations requiring modification. This approach balances appropriate boundary enforcement with potential resolution pathways, maintaining protection of core interests while allowing engagement that might facilitate family recalibration rather than permanent severance. The methodology replaces defensive posture with strategic framework, addressing systematic patterns rather than isolated incidents. By evening, my systematic research has expanded to include financial enmeshment recovery strategies, boundary establishment, methodologies, and healthy family financial practices. The knowledge acquisition transforms vague discomfort into structured understanding, replacing reactive emotional responses with evidence-based implementation strategies. A comprehensive guide to financial boundary establishment particularly resonates. Effective financial boundaries require systematic implementation across multiple domains: explicit communication, consistent enforcement, structural protection, and appropriate consequences for violations. Isolated boundary statements without comprehensive implementation typically prove ineffective against established extraction patterns. This framework validates my integrated approach, addressing communication, enforcement, protection, and consequences across financial, legal, physical, and psychological domains. The methodology transforms boundary establishment from isolated declarations to comprehensive system implementation, creating sustainable structure rather than temporary barriers. As harbor lights begin illuminating the darkening water, Thomas. Texts requesting brief conversation. Can we talk? Not about the property specifically, but about the situation. Trying to understand different perspectives here. His message suggests potential for differentiated engagement, maintaining appropriate boundaries regarding property issues while allowing limited communication with family members, demonstrating respect for established parameters. This balanced approach supports potential relationship reconstruction with appropriate individuals while maintaining necessary protection from exploitation patterns. I respond with measured openness. We can speak briefly tomorrow at 5:30 p.m. I appreciate your respecting the communication boundaries I've established. To clarify expectations, I won't be discussing the legal aspects of the property situation, as those are being addressed through appropriate channels. His immediate acknowledgement demonstrates understanding of established parameters. Understood and appreciated. Just want to maintain some communication during difficult circumstances. Talk tomorrow. This exchange represents potential for calibrated engagement, maintaining necessary boundaries while allowing appropriate communication with individuals, demonstrating respect for established parameters. The approach replaces all-or-nothing thinking, with nuanced implementation, supporting potential relationship reconstruction under appropriate conditions. Before concluding evening activities, I review implementation progress across multiple domains. Legal, formal notifications delivered, secondary deed protection confirmed, attorney discussions scheduled. Financial, automatic, transfers paused, comprehensive review underway, alternative support options identified. Communication, structured parameters established, filtering systems implemented, selective engagement permitted. Physical, temporary. Relocation secured. Workplace protocols implemented, security systems updated. Knowledge, research conducted, frameworks identified, specialist consultation completed. The systematic review confirms comprehensive rather than piecemeal implementation, addressing underlying patterns rather than isolated incidents. This integrated approach transforms boundary establishment from reactive defense to strategic reconstruction, creating sustainable structure for potential future engagement under appropriate conditions. As evening deepens across the harbor, the city's illuminated skyline creates distinctive pattern against darkened sky. Individual lights combining to form recognizable structure visible only from sufficient distance. This visual metaphor reflects my developing understanding of family dynamics. Individual incidents forming recognizable patterns when observed with appropriate perspective. The research and consultation process has provided exactly this necessary perspective, transforming isolated experiences into recognizable patterns, vague discomfort into structured understanding, and reactive responses into strategic implementation. The knowledge acquisition process represents not merely intellectual exercise, but practical empowerment, information creating capacity for effective response rather than continued vulnerability. This realization offers profound insight regarding current implementation, education functioning as essential foundation for empowerment rather than abstract understanding. The knowledge acquisition process transforms intuitive recognition into conscious implementation, replacing unconscious patterns with deliberate choices based on comprehensive understanding. With this clarity guiding implementation, I prepare for tomorrow's selective engagement with Thomas while maintaining appropriate boundaries regarding property issues. The approach balances necessary protection with potential relationship maintenance, supporting possible future reconstruction under fundamentally different conditions than previous exploitation patterns. The temporary accommodation, initially secured for physical protection, has provided unexpected benefit beyond security considerations. The neutral environment, untouched by established patterns or emotional associations, creates physical space aligned with the mental clarity emerging through knowledge acquisition and pattern recognition. The setting supports transformation rather than merely facilitating protection, creating capacity for development, rather than simply maintaining boundaries. Before concluding evening activities, I document key insights from today's research and consultation, creating structured reference, rather than relying on memory alone. This documentation process transforms abstract understanding into concrete implementation foundation, providing consistent reference for addressing complex family dynamics through evidence-based rather than reactive approaches. The systematics learning process has transformed my understanding of current implementation, not rejecting family connection, but establishing conditions under which authentic relationship might eventually become possible. Without appropriate boundaries, genuine connection remains impossible because exploitation patterns supersede mutual respect. Creating necessary limitations represents prerequisite for potential reconstruction rather than permanent severance. This understanding creates foundation for moving forward with balance rather than extremes. Maintaining necessary protection while allowing appropriate engagement. Establishing clear boundaries while remaining open to potential evolution. Addressing systematic patterns while recognizing individual differences within the family system. The approach transforms binary thinking into nuanced implementation, supporting sustainable recalibration rather than perpetual conflict. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.